present
So you got the good guys beating out the crap out of the bad guys over the funkiest music you ever heard. For me, a kid who grew up on the 70s, it didn't get better than that. Ultimately, those themes were my introduction to music.
60s and 70s cop shows, wow. Well, I'm a Gen Xer, so growing up, all those shows were always on in syndication. You would have McCloud, McMillan and Wife, Ironside, Kojak, Hawaii Five-0.
So now I'm into British shows, personally. Mostly John Barry soundtracks, Persuaders and Professionals. A lot of strings and harpsichords. Jay, on the other hand, he's still on the American shows. Wah-wahs and flutes, Mannix and Dan August.
And then this music comes on that it's gotta be the funkiest shit I ever heard in my life on a television show. And it just blew my mind. And I looked at the credits and I noticed that Dave Grusin did the music for Dan August. So that kind of sent a light bulb off in my head. I was like, well, what if the Du-Rites scored the music for an old, early 70s cop show? How would we swing it? And that was how Gamma Ray Jones and the whole idea of Cop Show Funk was born. Just watching Dan August, and I called Pablo and I was like, yo, I think we got it.
I think what makes the album great is how fast we wrote it. That speed, that rush, that's the funk.
We were on autopilot with this album, even though it's different than the other two albums. We were totally at a point where we were both so well versed with these cop shows from watching them as kids. And we're so in tune with our sound and our chemistry that it really, we had to tap into it when it was time to compose, but once a song started to develop, we knew exactly where we were going to take it. I think Gamma Ray Jones is our best work, obviously, but I think there's a good balance in this one. I mean, I think we've stepped it up in terms of composition and arrangement and just stretching our limits as musicians and as composers.
Unlike our previous album, Greasy Listening, which was mostly made on 100% agreement. So we left aside a lot of components that they were more like personal preference. We had to bring it back for the album. I mean, we have to bring back the strings and the synths because you don't have a cop show without strings and synths. And Jay was able to bring his jazz sensibility to it because, again, you cannot have cop show music without a jazz interlude.
Jazz influence, Latin influence, odd time signatures, cinematic kind of a stuff. These are things that we really never touched on the other albums. So that's why I think that this one is special. So Pablo's a Taurus and I'm a Pisces, so earth signs and water signs are generally cool, If he was a Leo or a Sagittarius, there might be some bloodshed, you know what I mean? But, sometimes we disagree on stuff too. A lot of times I'll go into a rabbit hole of listening to old Blue Note stuff, and then I'll have these little jazz sensibilities that will come into the composition part of the record.
Does send me pieces sometimes they're a little odd, and I complain at the beginning because I'm like, yo, we're a funk band, what do you want me to do with this? But ultimately we don't discard anything until it's finished, and we analyze at the end if the piece is good or not.
The bass line isn't working, the guitar, then the song will become a mess. So sometimes he's the one that has the experience with composition over me.
We compromise. I think he feels he compromised more than I do. And I think that's mostly because I have more experience dealing with other bands and other people, and I learned that you don't need to compromise in order to have a good interrelationship with the band.
I think the fact that he's not a Leo or a Sagittarius or an Aries has a lot to do with why we haven't killed each other yet.